Good morning.
Yes, hello, good morning, Professor. I had a quick question for you regarding, I'm actually doing the commentary, the fours and the fives I plan on getting finished this week, or by this weekend.
Mhm.
Oh, sorry, I don't have a shirt on. So, okay, but I had a quick question about the suttas. So, I'm like decent, I barely even started the Buddhist wisdom book, to be honest with you. I plan on doing that this weekend too. Anyway, so the suttas are the Four Noble Truths, or is that what he was teaching or his teachings thereafter? Because I'm kind of confused on what the suttas are
Those are
versus,
texts. Those are the three texts that we looked at in that section. So the first one is the Turning the Wheel Sutta.
okay, okay, I got
The
you. Yeah,
second
yeah.
one we looked at is the Kalama Sutta, and the third one is the uh, Anatta Sutta.
Okay, so it's the turning the wheel, the anatta, and then what was the other one called
Kalama.
again? The kalama.
Mhm.
Okay, and then these are texts written just about him and his teachings, or does this coincide with the Four Noble Truths?
These are transcripts of the actual discussion that he had with his students,
Okay,
and they're quite
and
short. They're just a few pages.
right. Oh, I see that. I know this book is only 100 pages. I could probably do that this weekend. I was looking forward to that.
Well, those
Okay.
texts are not in the book. Those texts are online. So the book,
Oh,
uh,
I've read those. Those are the ones I read, but I haven't read the book yet. I spent my time studying that. And to be honest, I actually had a couple questions with that too. Maybe we could set up, because this is going to be class time here soon.
mm,
With some of those texts, I got a little confused in some of the parts. I was following it, but then I think in a critical part, I didn't understand the lesson.
well, we had actually haven't gotten to the Buddhist wisdom text, so that's going to we'll be starting that next week.
Okay,
So
and you're talking about the Anada, the Kalama, and all of those texts, right? Like the
yeah,
readings from last week, the
yes,
transcripts.
those are the ones that we're finished with, and but they're not in a book form. They're just online files.
Right,
Yeah,
right. Okay.
but I'd be happy to meet with you. Mhm.
Yes, yes, because there's some questions I had with some of those texts that I think I failed to understand in a couple parts. So
Okay, so
whenever
we
you
can
get a
talk a
time.
little after class is over, and then if necessary, we can set up a time.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much for
Visit.
your time. I appreciate it.
No problem.
Okay.
I decided to start today by looking at the haiku essay for the week, which isn't going to be due until a few more weeks. So all of the sutras, haiku essays, will be due on, I think it's the 23rd is the date. Because I think as we're going through the Lotus Sutra chapter, it might help you to think in terms of how you need to respond to this question. So I know that some people are having trouble getting 500 words. So I hope this is a more creative and dramatic way to approach it. And I think it also ties in with the intention of the Lotus Sutra itself. So there's definitely a difference between the suttas, at least the suttas we've looked at especially, and how the sutras are set forth. So we looked at the first two interactions that the Buddha had with the 5 ascetics who then become the 5 monks. And in that case, it was the Buddha who is announcing his awakening and also trying to get some converts. And so these are people who are at totally entry level of Buddhism. And so they're quite short, and there's just one basic emphasis in each of those suttas. When we look at the Kalama Sutta, these are people who are not Buddhists at all, have heard about this guy Buddha, have heard good things, but they just have a question about who should they believe, who's telling them the truth. So there's no attempt at really conversion there. The Buddha is just providing them with this methodology for critical thinking. But in this sutra, we are looking at this large group of trans-species beings who are all Buddhist practitioners. So they're at a completely different level. And it's also the case that hundreds of years after the time of the Buddha, people are beginning to get confused about what constitutes Buddhist practice. And so this sutra is actually addressing that. It does it both in an entertaining way and in an informative way. So this is not just a work of philosophy, although there's a lot of it in there. It's also a piece of literature, highly regarded literature in the Sanskrit language. People were very interested in just hearing someone read this text. And so they would gather around, and more of in, since it's kind of, there's a poetic component in a chanting way. So people would go there and just listen. It also was a very great influence on the development of Buddhist art, especially in China. So you find many, many pictures of important scenes in the Lotus Sutra. So people engaged with it in a multitude of ways. And so that's what I'd like you to do, is to imagine that you're one of the audience members. Now, we talked about the different kinds of beings there. So there's arhats and Buddhist practitioners, kind of lay people. There's nuns, there's bodhisattvas, there's the sons of gods from variety different kinds of Vedic gods. They're dragon kings and heavenly singers and musicians and demons and dragon-eating birds. And then there's just run-of-the-mill human beings. So you can decide which one of that group you would like to be, because the Lotus Sutra is about all of them. It is not just the message of Buddhism for human beings, but it is the wisdom embracing all species. So we're going to use our 3 different stages. So what do you see? Well, how do you understand the Buddha's at times puzzling remark? So we saw that cognitive dissonance. He seems to be saying that none of you have a chance to acquire this Buddha wisdom, but in fact, he's not saying that at all. He's saying quite the opposite. So even if you have a confused sense of what he's saying, just tell me what you're getting out of it. And then, again, assuming yourself to be a Buddhist practitioner, what does that mean to you? This message that he's trying to communicate, why is that an important thing as a Buddhist practitioner? And why is this new message, and he makes it clear, this is something that he hasn't taught before. He's been teaching at a much lower level previously, and now he's going to give him the complete message. Why is that significant in terms of Buddhist philosophy? And at the very end, it talks about the audience and their minds are dancing with joy. So if you're in that audience, why does your mind dance with joy as the chapter ends? Okay. So you are there. and you're trying to put yourself in the role of this practitioner who is hearing something that seems to contradict your previous understanding of Buddhist practice. But it's actually an extension of Buddhist practice. So I think you should be able to get 500 words out of that. Any questions? Any need for clarification there? Okay, so let's go back. We had quite a bit that we didn't get through last time. Lots of imagery because, again, this is for a very broad audience. So I think last time the Buddha was basically outlining to the three different kinds of practitioners why they are not in tune with Buddha wisdom and how they're actually hitting a brick wall. So starting with the voice hearers. So let's assume you might want to imagine that you're Shariputra. Even if the whole world were filled with men like Shariputra, who was thought to be extremely wise, though they exhausted their thoughts and pulled their capacities, all these wise beings together, they could not fathom the Buddha's knowledge. So they're lacking something. There's something missing in their practice. And then he addresses the Pratikya Buddhas. These are the guys who go off on their own. So the voice hearers basically sit around and they listen to what the Buddha is saying. So this is really about how one interprets practice. Is it enough to just hear the words of the Buddha? Is that what is going to get you to be awakened? And briefly, no, that's just not enough. There's so much more to it. There's this empirical dimension. You have to experience the awakening. That doesn't mean that the words of the Buddha are non-essential, but you have to go much further than that. So the Pratikya Buddhas, they don't hang around the Sangha and just listen to what the Buddha is saying. They go out on their own, just like the Buddha had done before he became the Buddha, and they practice meditation. So they seem to be taking the initiative. However, there's also a problem. Though they should join together with one mind for 1,000,000 or for countless kalpas, kalpa is a very long period of time, hoping to conceive the Buddha's true wisdom, they could not understand the smallest part of it. So just going out there and meditating on your own is also ultimately a dead end. And then the third vehicle, so there's these three different traditional, at this time, forms of practice you could engage in, listening to the Buddha's words, going off and doing your meditation practice, or as a bodhisattva, taking the vow that you are not going to become awakened until all other beings, even the leaves of grass, can become awakened. So they are not just looking out for themselves in terms of their own awakening, but they're showing compassion. So that's the crucial element that they add in, and they are interacting with human beings in general. So they're close, but there's still a problem. So like so many rice and hemp plants, bamboos or reeds, filling the lands in 10 directions. So there's all this magnificent growth. With a single mind, with their wonderful knowledge, they could not understand the Buddha's knowledge. So it's not, again, what they're doing is wrong, it's just insufficient. So they need to do more than just that. So any questions so far? As everybody see, there's three different forms of practice that people were doing, and they seem to assume that's all there is to Buddhist practice. And basically they're underestimating their own capacity, because the main message of the entire sutra is that universal Buddhahood is possible, not just for human beings, but for all sentient beings, all species. And that's why they're all turning out among the audience members.
So other beings such as rocks and plants, those are considered as well?
Traditionally in early Buddhism, they talk in terms of sentient beings, that is a being that has the capacity to experience suffering, not just pain. So at that time, they didn't seem to include plants. But now we know that plants actually do respond to something that we could categorize as pain. So that's a very interesting element. And when we get into Chan Buddhism, they do talk about rocks and everything as having the Buddha nature.
Oh,
But at
okay.
this
Because
time, Mhm. Go ahead.
go ahead, Professor.
No, you go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, because when I saw this, including the rice, plants, bamboos, and filling the land, I think isn't this Zen Buddhism? Because from what I remember, they did include this too, or this is just about Buddhism in general.
Oh, I think he's comparing the bodhisattvas to these rice plants and hemp plants and bamboos and reeds. So they're popping up all over the place. That's, if you had all these literally hundreds of thousands of bodhisattvas out there, even if they put all their minds together, as he says, with a single mind, they still could not understand the Buddha's knowledge. They still would be missing something in terms of their practice.
Oh, okay, I understand now. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions here? So all of this does sound very confusing and very disappointing because they all thought they were doing a pretty good job at their different forms of practice. Now he reasserts the fact that it's not really a lost cause. So I have now attained it, that is Buddha knowledge, Buddha wisdom in full. Only I understand its characteristics, and the Buddhas of the 10 directions do likewise. So that's where he's actually including them. You can be part of those Buddhas of the 10 directions. So the 10 directions include north, south, east, and west, also up and down. So that was a kind of a standard way of referring to everything, you know, every place in the world. So now we have this notion of multiple Buddhas. So what you're doing is not sufficient. However, it is possible to have this Buddha wisdom. So how are they going to connect themselves to that possibility? So what is the audience going to do? We see into their minds, at least that's what the text tells us, and they're beginning to have a sense of doubt and hopelessness because they're not really understanding the deeper message. So he tells them toward the law, the Dharma, preached by the Buddhas, you must cultivate a great power of faith. So Shariputra speaks for the audience, and he refers to the Buddha as the son of wisdom. And he asks him to shed light on these disturbing revelations. So it sounds like, again, they're being shut out from Buddha wisdom, but in fact, he needs to have that clarified. So Shariputra says that, representing the Arhats, they have fallen into the net of doubt. So how can they have faith in Buddhism when they are beginning to doubt the way that they've been practicing Buddhism? Also, the Pratikya Buddhas are filled with perplexity. They're all confused. And then there's this really strange translation here. This is on page 28 of the text. Watson is actually a very good translator, particularly of Buddhist texts, but he's not a philosopher, so he kind of gets this one wrong, and you might misunderstand. So Buddha says he's going to address the most honored of two-legged beings. Now, he's not talking about beings that walk on two legs physically. So actually, he's referring to modes of joy and wisdom. So this, I think, is really significant. Not only do you need the wisdom component, but you need that uplifting emotional component of joy. And so that's going to come back in, as I mentioned, at the very end of the chapter. You don't just have this understanding of what he's saying, but you can feel that Buddha wisdom, and you feel it through the experience of joy. So the sutra, in multiple chapters, evokes joy in the audience. So he needs to add to their growing wisdom. So that's what is required here. Now, this is a very interesting part, not only of this chapter, but I think in all of Buddhist literature. The Buddha hesitates to give a response, and it's because he's worried about how the audience is going to react to this. So he wants to show them the whole truth, but this is important in terms of his skillful means of teaching. Not everybody's always ready to hear the complete truth. Sometimes it's more confusing than it is helpful. For example, if you have a 4-year-old whose mother is pregnant, and then the 4-year-old wants to know where babies come from, is it probably a good idea to grab a medical book and show the physiology of a pregnant woman? Is that going to answer the question of the 4-year-old about where babies come from? Is that going to be helpful? Or is the 4-year-old actually asking a different kind of a question? So you could give the complete truth to that kind of question, but somebody at the age of 4 is not in a position to actually take that in, and it might be totally confusing to them. And that's what the Buddha is worried about in terms of the audience. Maybe some of them are not ready to hear the complete truth since they've been working with partial truth. So that's what he says. If I speak of this matter, then the heavenly and human beings throughout the worlds will all be astonished and doubtful. Because what he's going to say, universal Buddhahood is possible for all, is a very difficult thing for them to grasp. And then he refers specifically to the monks who are overbearingly arrogant will fall into a great pit. So he's going to actually harm them by giving them too much information. So I think we can kind of compare it to the use of placebos. The placebo effect has been found very often in studies that you give 2 groups a new form of medication and then the other something that's basically a sugar pill. And sometimes people who are taking the placebo, the sugar pill, they have positive outcomes simply because they believe that they're taking a drug that's going to help them. So psychologically, they kind of talk their body into responding, even though they're not being given the complete truth. So you can kind of get addicted to the placebo, and that seems to be what might be happening in the case of some of the audience members. Nonetheless, he's urged by Shariputra to go on, and so he tells them, you must listen attentively and carefully ponder. I think this is very important how he puts it. So don't just believe it because I'm going to tell you this, but I want you to ponder. I want you to think this over for yourself. So for your sake, I will now analyze and explain the matter. So he's asking for active engagement on the part of the audience. He's not giving them the truth. He's giving them information that they need to think about, critically think about, carefully ponder over, so that they are willing and able to accept that it is the truth rather than going back to their placebo. So this is quite consistent with what we saw in the Kalama Sutta. They ask for the answer, who's telling us the truth, but in fact, he's just giving them information that they can then analyze along with him. Everybody see what his approach is. It's not being dogmatic. So this is one of the dramatic moments in the entire text. There's a group of 5,000 members of the audience, and these are described as the overbearingly arrogant. And as he's about to give his explanation, they walk out in protest. Amazing. Bunch of Buddhist practitioners. So these include monastics as well as lay people. And here's this opportunity to sit there and listen to the Buddha, and he's going to tell them this truth that he hasn't revealed before. And what do? They walk out on him. Doesn't that seem odd? Counterintuitive? And the explanation is that they are overbearingly arrogant. So the text says at the very bottom here, what they had not attained, they suppose they had attained. And what they had not understood, they supposed they had understood. So that's the problem. They don't want to stay there and listen to something different than what they already believe Buddhism is. So this is the kind of person, even someone trained in Buddhism, who really wants the Buddha to give them the dogma. Don't confuse me with the facts. Just tell me what I'm supposed to believe. And they believe they already have the complete truth about Buddhism. So this is the level of unconscious incompetence. They don't even know or want to know what they don't know. So they don't want to hear any additional information, even if it comes from the Buddha, who supposedly is their authority figure. Strange? Or does this demonstrate something about human beings?
Yes, I was going to say that this is us, the modern people with our egos, that we think we know better than.
Yeah, especially when you have conspiracy theories and so-called fake news and people don't want to hear any of the facts. They've already got it figured out, or they believe that they've got the social media has told them the truth, and therefore they don't want to look any further. So it is an ongoing kind of problem. Again, very similar to some of the issues the Buddha brought up in the Kalama Sutta. People get kind of sucked in with this false understanding.
It seems like for them, it's not really about Buddhism. Like it's just about needing an authority figure to tell them. It's not necessarily about the Buddha or Buddhism. It's just needing like guidance.
That's an excellent point. Yeah, so that's where they're overbearingly arrogant, because it's really, as you say, not about Buddhism at all, that they think they know what Buddhism is. And even if the Buddha is going to expand that message, they don't want to hear it because they've got enough.
And that goes directly in contrast to the Buddhist teachings, is after you learn to unlearn, and each path is individual, is different for each person, right?
That's right. So the notion of the great doubt, they are not willing to move from great faith to great doubt, even though they have faith in a very limited view of what Buddhism is. So we have two different ways of looking at truth. Truth is something I believe in because it's true. That seems very simple, but sometimes we have what looks like truth, but it's actually been called truthiness. It's true because I believe it. And unfortunately, a lot of that truthiness is happening in the world today. It's my belief in it, my faith in it, that makes me say it's true. It's not because it's true that I believe it. It's because I believe first, and therefore I decide it's true. And therefore you're unwilling, as you say, to enter into the process of doubting, just like a scientist would, to check and make sure that you're not misunderstanding what's going on. Now, there's also a key point that is brought up here. This law, that is Dharma, is not something that can be understood through pondering or analysis. So what he's saying here is, in the past, he had to use very creative ways to talk about Buddhist philosophy. Similes, parables, so there's actually quite a few of those in this text, and Buddha likes to tell little stories even in the suttas. So yes, he wants us to analyze, but when people first hear about Buddhism, he very often has to tell them stories that make it easier for them to relate to what his points are. We're going to get to Santa Claus in just a minute. There's a reason for him to be down there. So here, again, a very important element in this text, probably the place in the Buddhist literature where we get the clearest enunciation of what the real role of a Buddha is. Buddhas do not give enlightenment to others. In this case, he's merely revealing their existing potential. It's not just hearing the truth or committing it to memory, but it's about acting on it. And that's what's missing in particularly the first two vehicles, the voice hearers and the Pratikya Buddhas. So he puts forth these 4 perceptions of Buddha wisdom, and these have been blocked by ignorance. So we have to remove these obstacles so we can see reality as it is. So Buddha wisdom is accessible to us, but because of our ignorance, we're not seeing it. We're not seeing reality as it is. We just see what we expect to see. So these are the 4 ways in which a Buddha, not just the historical Buddha who's speaking, this is what Buddhas do in the world. Very clearly, we see that the Buddha is not a savior, not a religious figure who's going to give us the truth, but is just a facilitator. So the wisdom referred to here is Buddha wisdom. That wisdom is there, but it's blocked, and he uses the image of a door. So the first thing he needs to do is to open the door to wisdom. That you're not seeing the Buddha wisdom because of your ignorance. And once the door is open, then he has to point it out to them, show the wisdom to others. And what I'm doing here is comparing it to the 4 exalted dwellings. So opening the door to wisdom is a form of humaneness or empathy. You want to share with others what you know, in his case, Buddha wisdom. And then show them that wisdom, which would be compassion, cause them to wake up to wisdom. I think that's where the joy factor comes in. You know, once you see that there is such wisdom and you wake up to the connection you have to that wisdom, then how could you not respond with joy? And then induce them to walk the path of wisdom, which fits in with the notion of equanimity. So you have to know that it's available to you and then commit to it, waking up to it, and then live according to that wisdom. Now, what's interesting, when he uses the image of the door, he can't push us through the door. He can't drag us through that door. We have to walk through that door ourselves. That's where we get into this notion of self-power versus other power. So
I was gonna say, it sounds like it kind of has to do with self-confidence too. Like you have to have the confidence that you have the ability to attain that too.
yes, that's a very important point. That it comes up very often in particularly the sutras, that people like to sit around and listen to the Buddha. It sounds really great, but someplace in the back of their mind, they're thinking, no, that's not me. I can't even think of making it that far. And so they settle for a lot less. And that's what's happened to this particular audience. And he is trying to build up their confidence by removing their ignorance about their true identity. So it's not, your true identity is not this single separate Atman, but it is this inherent Buddha wisdom that you can access. So other questions about this? This is a very, I think, important philosophical moment in the text. So up to this point, they've been thinking about Buddhist practice in terms of these 3 vehicles, the voice hearer, the Pratyeka Buddha, and the Bodhisattva. And now Buddha's saying, well, you got to redirect, let go of these, suspend what you think you know about Buddhist practice, think outside the box, these 3 boxes. And in fact, he indicates that there is really only one form of practice, and that is the one and only Buddha way. So even though there are these, looks like 3 points of entry into Buddhist practice, in fact, there's really only one. And yes, that is St. Louis Arch, the one Buddha vehicle. So these 3 entry points were put forth, just as you would put forth let's say a limited definition of where babies come from for a 4-year-old. They just weren't ready for it, for the complete truth. And so he gave them these nice stories to get them started. So the upaya of the 3 vehicles was a tool to escape the bonds of suffering and to attain nirvana. His intent was to pry living beings loose from this or that attachment and allow them to attain release. So realizing that perhaps they weren't ready to go to full non-attachment, but kind of target specific forms of attachment. And then eventually they could work their way up to non-attachment as a whole. So particularly important here is this premature claim of enlightenment among the arhats. You might remember that when we looked at the suttas, there were references to the arhats as the highest level of practice. Well, in Mahayana Buddhism, they say, well, it's not actually the way things are. There's something beyond being an arhat. That would be, of course, the voice hearers. So it's really expanding the whole notion of what constitutes Buddhist practice, and especially that you don't have to be a monastic in order to realize awakening. Because to be an arhat, very specifically, it was connected with a monastic lifestyle. And in Mahayana, there's much more of a participation on the part of lay people. And so that monastic identity is no longer required, no longer emphasized. So basically, I think what he's saying, don't follow the Buddha. Don't think of him as this authority figure. Don't emulate the Buddha, use the Buddha as some kind of a role model, which is what the Pratikya Buddhas are doing, or modestly delay Buddhahood, which is what the Bodhisattvas are doing. But just go for it. Become the Buddha you already are. And so this is one of the huge differences between Theravada and Mahayana Buddhism. Theravada does seem to think of a process by which one comes to the level of Buddhahood, whereas Mahayana presupposes enlightenment among all of us, but we just happen to be sound asleep. So we already have that potential. We just need to realize that potential. You really are already a Buddha. So that's why this little image here. The lion is often a symbol of the Buddha. So we've got the cat looking at the mirror, and as she's looking in the mirror, she's seeing the lion. What matters most is how you see yourself. So as was mentioned earlier, this notion of self-confidence, self in quotation marks, of course. So the people and beings in the audience are not confident in their capacity to become Buddhas. They can't see themselves that way, but the Buddha is trying to help them to see that. So what is holding them back? In terms of the voice hearers, also known as the Shravakas, they have a negative focus. So they're trying to get rid of what they call outflows, things that are keeping them attached to different aspects of their life. But just getting rid of your attachments in and of itself is not sufficient. So they're students of the teachings of the Buddha who rely on outside help. So they're still looking to the Buddha as an authority figure. They assume that they themselves can only follow and not initiate. So they just hang on the words of the Buddha. So their limitation is this attachment, not to things of the world, not in a hedonistic sense, but attachment to the words of the Buddha themselves, or attachment to an intellectual understanding of Buddhism. So I compare it to notes that are taken very well by a student. So they write down whatever I tell them, but basically, from my point of view, that's just a C student because they're repeating what I told them. They're exerting some effort, but they're not really getting anything out of it. So all they can tell me is what I told them. Of course, they can do much more than that, but they have settled for that, just giving back what they were provided with. Now, interestingly enough, they have used dairy images to kind of imagine each one of these levels. So the higher the level of fat, the closer you are to Buddhahood. Their percentage of fat is like cream, which is 35 to 45%. So not even halfway there. It's not that what they're doing is not helpful, but they need to do a lot more. Everybody clear about the voice hearers, who at one time were the ideal model within Buddhism, and now they're saying, oh, you're just too stuck on the Buddha himself. You don't have confidence in your own Buddha wisdom.
So the way to do more is actually to do less and get rid of all of those dogmatic interpretations or everything that they've been accustomed to, right? That is the work itself that he's talking about.
Yeah, you start with the faith in the Buddha and the Dharma and in the Sangha, but then the next stage is that great doubt. You have to, in order to really understand what Buddhist practice is about, you don't want to turn it into just another cognitive set, just another view of the world, because we want the view of no view.
And so that's what he's talking about in the work, is when we have the view of no view, and then we grow from that point is the work.
Yes, yes. So getting rid of all views is very difficult because we are encouraged to assume different viewpoints. That's just part of how our mind works. So that's the ultimate attachment, as it is here, is attachment to words and ideas, because then you stop paying attention to what's actually happening around you. Other comments on this? Now, the next group is the Pratikya Buddhists. So these are the ones who go off and do their practice on their own. So they are said to be more accomplished, so they don't have any outflows. They've gone beyond where the Arhats are. They rely on themselves and their own abilities to follow the Dharma, so that they're out there on their own, taking the initiative. So that, again, makes them further along in their practice. But their limitation is actually ego attachment. So they have the initiative, they apply their own abilities rather than being dependent on the Buddha, pursue what we might call a path of self-help, but they rate as a B student, I would say, because they're limited by their narrow sense of self-identity. So they've got the wisdom, but they're missing a key component that is extremely important in Mahayana Buddhism, and that is compassion. They're out there to attain awakening for themselves. And that's where they're not attached to any of the other things. They're not attached to the words of the Buddha, but they are attached to their ego because they want to become awakened. I want awakening. They're not thinking about others. So they're like the curd, the coagulation of the dairy product. So they have taken positive action, they make offerings, they master doctrines, they might go out there and do preaching. This is the next step that we find in the Bodhisattvas.
Professor?
Hmm?
A question about the previous one. Where
yeah.
it says they're without outflows, what does that mean? I missed that somewhere.
Yeah, it's a kind of a strange term that is used. The outflows are any of the things that would continue to attach you to a diluted sense of reality. So this kind of goes back to the kind of ascetic practice, although we don't want to take it that extreme, but you don't allow your tana, your thirsts, to dominate your life, because we have to end the thirst in order to end the dukkha.
Great, thank you.
So the voice hearers have been working on that. The Pratikya Buddhas had made more success. So the voice hearers are trying to eliminate all their outflows. The Pratikya Buddhas have eliminated their outflows, except for this attachment to their sense of, I want to become awakened. So it's much easier to remove your attachment to external things than it is to remove the attachment to the sense of ego. That's kind of like the final contest. Other questions? So it's specifically that ego attachment that is removed by the bodhisattvas, because they're going out into the world, preaching. They are specifically referred to as wisdom beings. Bodhi is the word wisdom, and sattva is a being. They are wisdom beings who are practicing delayed gratification. So they've got everything they need to become a Buddha, but they decided to wait until everyone can jump on the raft of Mahayana and travel from the shore of samsara to the shore of nirvana. And they're going to take us there. So they're Buddha wannabes. They got great aptitude. They're compassionately trying to help others before helping themselves. and they avoid the self-involvement of the first two groups. So they're not stuck on the words of the Buddha or the authority of the Buddha. They're also not stuck on, I want to become awakened, because they're actually saying, oh, no, I'm going to delay my awakening until we can all do it together. So they're very, very close. So what could possibly be wrong here? Well, their limitation is attachment to non-attachment. So they impose their own limitation. So I give them a grade of A-. So they need to realize that they are already Buddhas. They're Buddhas except in the sense that they are not confidently going to walk through that door to Buddha wisdom. And if you think about it, as a bodhisattva, can I actually do as much as I could do for others as a Buddha would? Why wouldn't you take that final step to become a Buddha, and then you could do so much more for people? So what is it that is really holding them back? So it's as if they've created their own glass ceiling. Nobody's stopping them from taking that final step except them. And it appears that they're just a little bit unclear on what it actually means to be a Buddha. So they're at the level of butter. So they're 80% fat. So really, really close. So what's left? Those are the three vehicles, the three forms of practice that were widely available for hundreds of years after the time of the Buddha. But this particular sutra is trying to tell us, well, there really was only one from the very beginning. So beyond these three forms of practice is full realization. And that's, as the Buddha says, I have now attained in full. So he's not bragging about him. I think he's just trying to indicate, yes, this in fact is the case. You can do it too. So this would be ghee, which is 100% fat. We tend to have a negative view of fat in our culture, but in terms of nutritional value, in early Indian society, the ghee is the highest value of all of the dairy products. Also the most expensive. If you go to the grocery store today, where you can very often find ghee in regular grocery stores, it is the most expensive. So don't undersell yourself. Don't underestimate your potential. You have to keep moving on. So the audience response is healthy skepticism. Healthy in the sense that they've got it. They've got the notion of great doubt. It sounds too good to be true. So they're really pondering, which is exactly what the Buddha asked them to do. That yes, this is not something that you've heard before. This is going to be confusing, but I think you're ready for it, except for the 5,000 who walked out. Now, what's interesting in the Lotus Sutra text, throughout the chapters, different groups are, in a sense, targeted by the Buddha in terms of the message that he is providing. So a group of arhats has a chapter, and the group of nuns has a chapter. And in each case, the Buddha is trying to empower them in terms of their own Buddhist practice. As those chapters come to an end, the Buddha issues a prophecy or a prediction about their future awakening. I'm bringing this up because even those 5,000, the overbearingly arrogant, receive a prophecy of awakening. So even the ones who walked out on the Buddha eventually are going to become awakened. They haven't lost their potential by walking out on him. So what is it that would prevent us from accepting what the Buddha is telling us, accepting the message of universal Buddhahood? Basically, it's a psychological attitude. That's what's manifested in the skepticism, but it's healthy skepticism. We have to work this through. He's not saying, believe it because I told you. I want you to think about this. So are you being overbearing in your arrogance? Are you like the ones who walked out? Are you failing to see your own errors and cling to your shortcomings? So this would apply in the case of, let's say, the voice hearers. They thought they were doing all they possibly could in their practice by just sitting around and listening to the Buddha and repeating his words. So they have to admit, well, you know, I thought I was doing the right thing, but actually I can do a lot more. And once you realize that you have made an error in your assessment of practice, are you willing to change? That's a psychological situation. And then he uses this wonderful image. They stray into the dense forest of mistaken views. It's a wonderful word. So you're not only confused and arrogant and unaware of your errors, but you're living in the middle of this dense forest of mistaken views, so that you can't even see clearly because it's so dark in there. And if you're living in a dense forest of mistaken views, what would be the best thing to do under those circumstances?
Turn on the light or walk out of the forest.
Yeah, get out of that forest. Move away from those mistaken views. And that's the opportunity he's giving them. So these mistaken views actually represent forms of attachment. We are attached to our own creations. Their idea of what Buddhist practice was, their idea of what it meant to be a voice hearer, or their idea of what it meant to be a Pratikya Buddha, or the idea of what it means to be a bodhisattva. We're going to see more of the critique of bodhisattvas in the Diamond Sutra. So it's a very high level of practice, but there are some inherent problems there. So it's our construct, this perception we have, that needs to be very carefully analyzed. So when the Buddha realized that the human, I can't say just human, that the beings that he's interacting with have this kind of psychological impairment, he started using this very creative use of language, upaya, skillful means. He couldn't tell them directly the full message of the one Buddha vehicle. He had to prepare them like that 4-year-old until they were mature enough to actually understand what he had to say. So he employs causes, similes, parables, words that embody the power of expedient means in order to gladden and please. So he wants to attract the audience to his message by making it sound like what they perceive Buddhist practice to be. So although there is one single vehicle, it's useful to speak of 3. So he admits, yes, I did talk about the 3 vehicles in the past, but that was a way to prepare you until you were mature enough and ready to go for the great vehicle. The law of the Dharma, in which all things are equal. So when you think about the 3 vehicles, there does seem to be a kind of a hierarchy there. There's a difference between voice hearers and Pratikya Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, but hierarchy is not equality. There's only one way that all beings come to awakening. So the 3 vehicles, I like to think of them as training wheels. Now, skillful means is a transition to one vehicle. So anybody got any personal experiences with training wheels? Can share with us? She looks pretty happy with her training wheels, doesn't she?
It's like at some point you're comfortable with it, but at some point you have to just accept that you're scared, but just do it anyway. Like take the training wheels off anyway, and know that eventually you're going to learn how to ride a bike.
Yeah, so this is very relevant to what the Buddha is telling them, that you're so used to those training wheels, and now I'm going to, ask you to take them off because I'm confident that you can actually do this. And a lot of children don't want it. They want to hang on to those training wheels. Okay, we got a question here, I guess. Oops, where's our question here? Oh, here we go. Ooh. So if you take off the training wheels, then we are, in fact, following the path of the Buddha. But in order to make the kid comfortable, you give him those wheels. But it can be a point of great contention when it comes time to get the wheels off. And why would a child not want to take them off? Whether they feel comfortable, but what else might be going through their mind? If I have those wheels taken away, what's going to happen to me when I try to ride my bike?
You might get hurt.
Yes, it's the fear of failure. So it's better not to even try, because I think I might fall down. So I'll just stick with what I know. And that's why the transition can be problematic, like the overbearingly arrogant. So although I preach nirvana, this is not a true extinction. This is very important in terms of the evolution of Buddhist philosophy. In the suttas, they talk about nibbana, which is the Pali word for nirvana, and that seems to be like the end. It's all about blowing out the fires of the three poisons. But here, Mahayana is saying, well, no, that was just part of it. There's something beyond this notion of nirvana. That's the negative part, but then there's the positive part. So I employ only the single vehicle way. So that's really the only thing he was ever talking about. To teach and convert bodhisattvas, I have no voice hearer disciples. So this is very interesting. At the beginning, he says that voice hearers cannot understand Buddha wisdom, Pratikya Buddhists cannot understand it, but he really wasn't talking about anyone in that audience, because here he says he only has bodhisattvas as his students. So everybody in that audience is being recognized as a bodhisattva. Now they might perceive themselves as a voice hearer or a Pratikya Buddha, but in his mind, they're all Buddhas in waiting, which is what a bodhisattva is. So that's why initially when he was talking about the problem of those three vehicles, the bodhisattvas were not in the same category as the first two were. So he doesn't really say that they have no access to Buddha wisdom. So this is a provisional kind of terminology. Preaching, I term the wheel of law, that is Dharma, and also with regard to the sound of nirvana and arhat, Dharma, Sangha, I use these terms to indicate distinctions. So people wanted to hear nice, separate, discrete terms. It made them feel more comfortable. So you need to do this, you need to blow out, you need to arrive at or realize nirvana. And then you can become an arhat, and you can follow the Dharma, and then you become a member of the Sangha or the Sangha. But that was just like training wheels, just to make people feel comfortable. So at the start, I took a vow. So I think he means at the start of his teaching, hoping to make all persons equal to me without any distinctions between us. So when you read this statement, I think it's quite clear that this is not a God talking. This is a person who's trying to share this amazing experience with others. And not just that he wants to share it, but he has taken this vow that he's going to devote the rest of his life to making all persons equal in the sense that they have had the same awakening experience, without any distinctions between us. That everybody else is exactly the same as this guy we call the Buddha. So this is egalitarianism. The Buddha wants you to walk next to him, not behind him. He's not interested in followers, although many people are interested in being his followers, but that's not what he has in mind. So any notion of the Buddha as a religious figure, authority figure, I think is completely impossible when you take a look at this kind of statement. Any comments? Some amazing things that come up in this text.
That's like the most puzzling thing about people. Here you're given an opportunity to be on your own, to be your own, and you still try to make up some kind of idol to pray to or to kneel before.
Yes, yes, and
Some
it
kind of
goes back.
manifestation or lesson, some kind of manifestation or lesson within inside themselves that they, or outside of themselves that they're searching for, right?
They're assuming they need something outside of themselves. And what the Buddha is saying is that you have access to this Buddha wisdom, so you can actually do it on your own. That self-power concept. But there is throughout all cultures, a tendency to look to someone else to solve your problems. A lot of it has to do with lack of confidence, and also the fact that society is often structured in a hierarchical way, and they condition you to believe that you can't do it on your own, that you have to
Or
depend
maybe
on.
this is
Mhm.
maybe this is the reason why human society is structured this way to begin with, because majority of us don't have that leadership streak in them at all. They just follow. That's the only way they see how to live.
Well, I would agree that they have that perception, but I would disagree that they don't have the capacity, because I think you do have the capacity. You just underestimate yourself.
Yes, that's
Mhm.
correct.
Yeah. And in fact, the other class I'm teaching this semester is Asian leadership philosophies, and we're actually talking about Krishnamurti, who says you should get rid of all leaders, because leaders make bad followers and followers make bad leaders. Everybody should be like this, all equal. But that's kind of a minority position. So this reminded me of a Tibetan master by the name of Patrul Rinpoche. And as he was coming to the end of his life, he wrote this really amazing poem called Chase Them Away, where it's kind of like an autobiography of the different phases he went through in his own training. And one of the things that he was thinking about as he was ending his life is how his interaction with his teacher, he says supreme teacher, he's the main teacher that he worked with when he was a Buddhist practitioner. At the end of his life, he feels a lack of distinction or hierarchy. So at first, the supreme teacher seems like they're so far above him, and that this is the authority figure who's going to give him all the information. And then he wants to imitate his teacher. And at the end of his life, all the distinctions, all the hierarchy is gone. So when he meets the teacher, feeling of meeting with an equal, just like the Buddha was talking about, uses the image of pigeons sleeping in a temple. How do pigeons sleep when they're together? Is there a hierarchy? You might not have much of an opportunity to see pigeons sleeping, but
No, I think they just line up on line up
they
next to
kind
each
of
other.
lean on each other and like a big friendly mass. And the last part might seem a little confusing, but actually it's consistent. So keeping one's distance. So in order to avoid becoming dependent on that teacher, you keep the distance so that you don't have the temptation to reassert them as an authority figure. So we'll see this aspect when we get to the very famous Zen statement, if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. That's really what that's about. You're not really supposed to kill the Buddha. It's about the problem of becoming dependent on this external authority figure.
If the Buddha was just a person, he's not a god, he became Buddha. Like it seems like other people should think of themselves the same way. Like they can learn from the Buddha can learn from them. It's like if anyone can be the Buddha, then Buddha shouldn't be seen as like an authority, which is obviously hard to grasp, but that seems like what his goal is.
Yes, and he had to reassert it over and over again, even when he was on his deathbed and his disciples are crying their eyes out because he's leaving and what are we going to do without you? He told them, be lights unto yourself. So you don't need me. He wasn't flattered by their gloom. He might have thought, gee, I guess they weren't listening to me, because they didn't really need him to continue on their practice. So in thinking through, comment?
Oh yeah, Professor. The comment about the Buddha's when he on his deathbed wasn't from what I remember, his last words was "strive on untiringly." Is that correct?
There's different translations. So one of the common ones is be lamps unto yourself, but basically it is, yeah, just keep up and keep doing what you've been doing. Don't think that it's over for you just because I'm not here.
Okay, so basically, like, in he's saying that, like, don't give up. It's not over yet. It's not finished. Like, you
That's
must
right.
continue on.
Yeah, apparently some of the disciples thought, oh, this is the end of Buddhism because we don't have him. But from the very beginning, he was trying to tell them, no, it's not about me. It's about the method. It's about the practice.
Yes, yeah, because the reason why Buddhism is not over because everybody has a chance to be a Buddha, not just him, not just Siddhartha, right?
That's right. And that's, I think, one of the most important things that the Lotus Sutra is trying to convey, because people were in the mistaken forest of dark views.
Okay, thank you.
So thinking through how the human mind works and how, previously before he became the Buddha, he also was looking for some outside authority figure. He tried to come up with the right strategy. I thought to myself that if I merely praised the Buddha vehicle, then the living beings sunk in their suffering would be incapable of believing this law, the Dharma, that they might not think they're up to it yet. So that's why he comes up with the three vehicles as forms of skillful means. So people of small wisdom delight in a small law or Dharma, unable to believe that they themselves could become Buddhas. So that goes back to the previous comment about the lack of confidence. He understood that. So just because you delight in small wisdom doesn't mean you don't have access to Buddha wisdom, but you're kind of stuck there. You, again, underrate yourself. So we have to expand their capacity. So they think they're only a cup container when in fact they can hold multiple cups. So they misidentified themselves. And here towards the end of this chapter, very interesting, what can you do in the world, even if there are no Buddhas in the world? So how can you continue your practice? So some of the things that he mentioned seem rather odd. Some of them are part of what we take to be religious practice. So making offerings, so at a temple, building temples, making a Buddha tower out of sand. So some children playing on the beach, making a Buddha tower or a stupa, erecting images. So by this time in Mahayana, they erected images. In early Theravadan Buddhism, there were no images of the Buddha. That was something that was considered inappropriate. You would just see the Dharma wheel or even a footprint. Making music, singing, chanting, listening to the law or to the Dharma. So these are all ways to practice Buddhism. It's not just a very narrow way of practice, but it really encompasses all aspects of a person's life, including children. So they're out there building this Buddha stupa.
Isn't this like worshiping the Buddha, which the Buddha didn't want?
Well, making offerings to the temple and building temples, the temples would be where the Sangha members would be. So there's no mention of worship here, is there? So these are practices that were associated with what happened in Buddhist temples, but what looks like worshiping from an outside perspective, it's not how it's interpreted by Buddhists themselves.
This is more like keeping people focused or oriented on it, right?
That's right. And getting together and making music. So music is a very big part of Buddhist ceremonies. Singing and chanting, those are things that they do together. So they're chanting usually suttas and sutras, listening to the Dharma, listening to suttas and sutras. So this is ways for people in the Sangha, which is the community of Buddhists, to get together and have that connection with each other, support system for each other. But there's no mention here of worship. That's something that we would impose from the outside. So when I talk to the Buddhist monks and nuns, when I teach in Taiwan, and I tell them that students here think that when they bow down to the Buddha, they're worshiping him, the statue, they just think it's funny because that's not how they see it at all. They just show it as see it as a sign of respect. So we have a different interpretation of those kinds of activities. But he warns them, here's our dense forest of mistaken views. Don't stray into the dense forest of mistaken views, debating as to what exists and what does not. So don't get off on a metaphysical tangent and start having back and forth arguments. You know, he's a very pragmatic kind of guy. Just stick to what needs to get done. Because if you do that, if you have play these little philosophical language games, you become profoundly committed to false and empty doctrines, arrogant and puffed up with self-importance. So this is part of that poison arrow problem. You've got a poison arrow in your back. You don't have time to get involved in speculation. So you philosophize rather than act, as Hamlet does in Shakespeare's play. Doubt, however, is something that's come up from the very beginning. How do you deal with doubts? So the doubts that were raised at the beginning of the chapter are now dissolved. So it wasn't wrong for them to have those doubts. Those were healthy doubts. They had to work through them. He provides them with the analysis. And that's where the joy comes at the end, because they can let go of those doubts. So you will have no more doubts or perplexities, but your minds filled with great joy will know that you yourselves will attain, I would prefer realize, it seems more accurate, but will attain Buddhahood. So at first they were stuck on the three vehicles because they thought that Buddhahood was beyond their reach. And what he's trying to convey to them is, no, that's exactly what I had planned from the very beginning to teach that. And I just wanted to make sure that you were ready to hear that message. And that's what's happening here. So we've got the appearance and the reality. So the first vehicle, that of the voice hearer, get a little more evolved with the second vehicle, the Pratikya Buddha, when you're go out there, practice on your own. Third vehicle would be the Bodhisattva vehicle, which is very, very close. But those are just the appearance. That's your perception of Buddhist practice. The reality itself is the Buddhahood. That's what the Buddha was intent on from the very beginning, but wanted to make sure people were open to that possibility and didn't run away like the 5,000 who walked out. So the three vehicles are the partial reality. The one vehicle is the full reality. The discriminating mind has the cognitive set. So you got your choices. You could pick vehicle 1, vehicle 2, vehicle 3. Makes it look like we've got choices. You know, people like to have choices. In fact, there's only this one vehicle, universal Buddha wisdom, non-discriminating mind. So everyone is an equal to the Buddha. That's what he wants. And this requires flexible thinking. There's this sense of stagnation, unchanging, the eternal. So that's where people were looking for being, universal being, eternal being, Brahman, Atman. All of those are a perception that we have. It's like an island, whereas the full reality, the Dharma, so these would, the partial reality, that's all those dharmas, plural, impermanence, that's what the Buddha realized. Everything is in a state of becoming, asymmetrical, encompassing this allocentric attention. Difference between Newtonian science, so we saw this brought up when we talked about the Anatta Sutta. Newtonian science has privileged acts of selection. So I see the sun set. People say that all the time. It's all egocentric. There's me, and then the sun is moving in relationship to me, and therefore I say that the sun has set. In fact, when you look at it from the cosmic viewpoint and the quantum mechanics viewpoint, there is no is, there's just a does, the process. And the sun really does not set, does it? There is a cyclical rotation of the earth, which appears to us as if the sun is setting at the end of the day, but that's not what happens, right? And still we talk about the sunset, don't we? It's just our way of discussing things, but it is not technically accurate. So there's ways in which we try to understand reality, and then there's the actual reality. So these, again, would be the dharmas, this framework through which we try to interpret our experiences, and that's where the three vehicles come in, when in fact the Buddha is trying to redirect our attention to the complete reality. But that's much more challenging for us to accept, because we have to get beyond our egocentric and anthropocentric view of reality. Any questions about this? So there's a transition, there's a shift that needs to be made from what we assume to be common sense reality, and then the awakened reality of a Buddha. So here's our friend Inada again. Is it not true that an island does not exist alone, but finds itself surrounded by water? Our habits of perception have conditioned us so much that we naively focus merely on the island as if it is an independent existence. So what he's warning us about is that we focus our attention on that island and we forget about the context. The island would be like the dharmas, and then the ocean that contains the islands, that would be the Dharma. That's the way that the Buddha looks at it. And that's why they say the jewel is in the heart of the lotus. The jewel in the heart of the lotus, what's inside here? I think we talked about this a little, didn't we? What's the most important part of a lotus? It's not the beauty of the flower. It's what's in its heart, and that would be
Seeds?
the
Nectar?
seeds. That's right. And those seeds are interpreted as the Buddha nature. But in order to get people's attention on the Buddha nature, sometimes we have to put it in a very beautiful package. And that's what the Lotus Sutra is, a beautiful package. Oops, there we go. So here is our essay where you get to engage your imagination and put yourself into the picture of chapter 2. And again, even if you don't have complete understanding what's going on at this point, what do you understand in terms of what the Buddha is trying to say to you as a member of that audience of Buddhist practitioners? And why is that meaningful to someone who practices Buddhism? And why is that significant to Buddhist philosophy? So how does that explain the shift to this uplifting emotion of joy? He guarantees us the joy that comes from not just saying we have Buddha wisdom or thinking we have Buddha wisdom, but actually a kind of an existential connection to our Buddha wisdom, that this could actually happen to us. Everybody see what you're doing there? You are there with the Buddha. What's going on in your mind? That's what's important. How are you psychologically processing what he's saying? And he's guiding the discussion in such a way that the intention is for you to end up with this joy. Of course, the 5,000 who left, they're not going to get the joy at that particular point because they're gone. So they missed out this time. Any questions about that? Anyone decide to be another species? You could be a monk, you could be a nun, you could be an arhat. You got lots of choices.
So we're talking about the puzzling remarks being his non, I attachment, or the way he was teaching them to let go?
Well, you're in that audience. What do you hear him saying? So that's what I'm looking for. What is your understanding of what you've heard? Assuming that you're a Buddhist practitioner, how would that change the way that you think about or perceive Buddhist practice? And how does that bring you to joy, which is what he indicates? And the text itself actually does describe that audience members feel their minds dancing with joy. That phrase is actually used there. So he doesn't just say you're going to experience it, but the audience is in fact experiencing it. That's what we're told. So what's the connection between his revelation about Buddha wisdom and the experience of joy? So the important thing is to try to imagine that you're there. And then next week, we're going to start with the Heart Sutra. So that's going to be found in the Kanza book, the Buddhist wisdom book, which should also be available online. So I did provide a link to that. If you're having problems, let me know. So any questions at this point? Everybody clear? Okay, so if you have any questions over the weekend, you know how to get in touch with me, and I hope you all have a very nice, pleasant weekend. A little bit of a cool down here. Yeah, so this week's reading was all the Lotus Sutra. Yes. Good.
Thank you, Professor. Have a nice
Thank you.
weekend.
You too. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor. Have a nice weekend. Happy Mid-Autumn Festival.
Yes.
中秋节快乐。
Thanks.